Well, good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRNAM for Monday, July 10th, 2023. Our top story today, drought hits the Midwest, threatening crops and the world's food supply. And joining me now to discuss this and a lot more, Brad Rippey is a meteorologist with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Brad, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Thanks. Great to be with you.
Let's talk about, I think many Americans and people are watching this all around the country, in fact, all around the globe. We've all been impacted by the weather. We've got the summer months mostly here in the United States. But with that, maybe comes some challenges in terms of agriculture, the weather, water, et cetera. How are we doing from an agricultural perspective when it comes to the weather?
In my role with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, I focus on U.S. weather. So I can tell you that we have been dealing with a very interesting drought so far this growing season that has been focused almost exclusively across the Great Plains and the Midwest, which just happen to be the nation's breadbasket areas. A lot of the winter wheat, spring wheat, as well as corn and soybeans come out of that region. And so we see, as we move into the 4th of July weekend and heading into July, we see our lowest rated U.S. corn crop since the summer of 2012. Anybody around weather and agriculture knows that 2012 was an absolutely disastrous year in terms of drought, really a continental scale drought. Now this year, it's been, as I mentioned, more focused across the breadbasket areas of the nation's midsection. Just in the last few days, we have seen some relief, some cooler weather, some much needed rain. So we're just in real time seeing if we can try to turn the corner on this drought and maybe make something out of what has been a very dry start to the growing season in the United States.
Brad, as a follow-up to that, I know you're not an economist, but just talking about if the farmers cannot grow enough food, in this case, corn, beans, et cetera, this has a major impact on prices, I would presume. Prices here domestically, but also U.S. agriculture supplies food around the world.
Right. And out of our office, the chief economist office, one of the publications that comes out is the World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimates Report. We call it the WASDE for short. And that tracks global supply and demand on all major food crops and cotton as well. And so when you see big things happening in the United States in terms of drought or severe weather, that does have implications for world food prices. Now, of course, there's a lot more to that picture. You have to look at all of the major world ag production areas. And so we've seen in recent months or years, everything from COVID to world conflict. Think about Ukraine and Russia. And that also has a profound impact on food prices. Hence the inflation that we've all been dealing with, not just for food, but everything over the last several years, all tied in to everything from COVID to global conflict to drought. Now, I will also mention that just in the last few weeks, we have entered into El Nino, a warming of the equatorial Pacific. And that also has the potential to have a profound impact on the supply and demand situation. So we've got a lot of stuff going on. Drought in the United States is only one small part of this. And it's a very complex array, as you can imagine, of things playing back and forth all the time and controlling and influencing these food prices.
Yeah, really, really important points. As a follow-up to that, Brad, what about there has been some forest fires in Canada. How does that impact what we're talking about here? Does it impact the weather? I mean, I know I'm in the southern part of the United States and in Charlotte, North Carolina, but talking to friends and colleagues in the north, I mean, they see haze, they smell the smoke. How does that play into the weather and what we're talking about today with food prices?
Right. Yeah, I'm in Washington, D.C. to the point of that smell and taste of smoke in the air. And we've had 2 rough episodes in June where you could taste the wood in the air. Incredible. So the background on that, Canadian forest fires have burned more than 20 million acres of vegetation so far this year. That is an all-time record for the country of Canada for an entire year. So we're only halfway through the year, and we have seen more burn in that first half of the year in Canada than we've ever seen, at least in modern times. Previous record, in case you're keeping track, was 1995, which was a big drought and heat ridge summer across North America. So anyway, all of that smoke, that particulate matter, has largely drifted southward across the United States or eastward across the open Atlantic. And it has had some effect on the amount of sunshine. It is obviously filtered sunshine reaching through to the ground. There's some opposing effects. Some of the diffusion of sunlight is actually positive for crops, but when you block out too much, then that can be a negative factor. Also, the pollution factor, ozone and other contaminants, can also adversely affect agriculture. So the overall net impact when you have very thick smoke for a long period of time can be to reduce yield potential. So that is something we are also closely watching heading through the rest of the summer. We've still got a lot of uncontrolled fires burning in Canada. When the jet stream brings that smoke down, that can have an impact on Midwestern crops.
Yeah, and it sounds like there's just a lot of headwinds. Brad, I need to take a very quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the impact of farmers and how they're dealing with all this. You're going to want to stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms? Especially for the smaller businesses. I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network.
Tax audits, tax liens, wage garnishments.
Every day we hear stories like this about good folks who are simply struggling to pay their bills. Each of them are living a frightening IRS tax nightmare, and they are afraid it will destroy their lives.
I'm a divorced single mom, and my ex-husband left me and the kids with a lot of unpaid bills, including unpaid taxes. I was really starting to show my stress on my kids because the IRS had sent me a letter demanding a huge payment from me. I couldn't afford it. So then the IRS was threatening to garnish my wages. I'm already living paycheck to paycheck. That would have put me over the edge financially.
It truly seemed hopeless, but then a friend at work told her to call the tax relief line.
The people at the tax relief line, they told me about something called innocent spouse relief. They worked it out so that all of the taxes from my ex are not my problem. I don't know how that works, and I don't care. All I care about is that I don't owe the IRS a dime, and they are not going to take my paycheck.
Even if it seems hopeless, you should call the number on your screen right now. There is absolutely no cost for the call or the consultation. You are under no obligation. If you are worried that the IRS could garnish your wages, seize your assets, even take your home, call us right now. The Tax Relief Line is here to help you. Now you have a knowledgeable, professional team of tax experts that are ready to negotiate with the IRS and fight for you to save you money. The Tax Relief Line's professionals have successfully negotiated thousands of cases, reducing and sometimes even eliminating the tax debt for their clients. It's very easy to get started. Simply call the number on your screen right now. You don't have to live in fear anymore. The call and the consultation are free.
Well, Brad, thanks so much for staying with us this morning. Really appreciate you hanging around for segment number 2. Brad, let's talk about the impact, how farmers are dealing with this. Obviously, farmers grow the crops. They're providing the food. How do you deal with, and I know you may not be a farmer, obviously you're a meteorologist for the Department of Agriculture, but how do farmers react to the lack of water? I mean, where do you get the water from? How do you water your crops? How do you take care of your crops with all these headwinds going on?
So let's kind of break it down a little bit. We'll start out with the Midwest, where most of our crops are rain-fed. There's really no source of irrigation or anything that's provided to the crops other than what falls from the sky. We've, over the last several decades, going back 3 or 4 decades, we've only seen a handful of years when rainfall has not been adequate to produce pretty good crops of, say, corn and soybeans, which are the staple crops in that region. 1988, 2012 are the huge exceptions to the rule for the Midwest. Now, as you move further west, you get to the Great Plains and into the western United States. That's a different ballgame there. They rely very heavily on either groundwater or stored water from reservoirs or surface sources. And so from the Great Plains westward, over the last quarter century or so, we have seen chronic drought conditions. It's been an incredible stressor for American farmers in those regions. We've seen a lot of mental health crises, and it has been a very difficult run going back to the late 90s, early 2000s. So a lot of today's producers, as they get into their 50s and 60s, they've been doing this their whole life, struggling with these periodic episodic droughts. And as you move further into the Southwest, to get into the American Southwest, it's been chronic drought. 3 out of every 4 years over the last 25 years has been a drought year in places like Southern California and the desert Southwest. So as the reservoirs have come down through this chronic drought, mega drought, some have called it, that has also created problems because you just can't maintain the acreage that we're accustomed to in some of these arid and semi-arid areas. So it's a long-term crisis problem with farmer mental health, and just it continues. And even with a wet winter like we saw in California and much of the western US, that doesn't mean the problem is solved. Some of our big reservoirs on the Rio Grande, Lake Mead in the Colorado Basin, still critically low, and we're not done with this drought. So that's something as we move forward that you have to consider is this mega drought situation. And then finally, I'll just mention that as you move to the Great Plains and also parts of the West, there's been so much pumping of groundwater that we're running out of groundwater reserves. So that also becomes an issue because you can't irrigate like we did back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. You have to either be more efficient at irrigation or cut back on your acreage. So that's an ongoing problem for American farmers, especially in the Southwest.
Yeah, my apologies for jumping on your last comment. I mean, it just feels like these farmers are so under pressure, both financially, or mainly financially, and as you said, it has an impact on mental health. Is there anything they can do to bridge the gap? I mean, obviously you can't. Water is water. You need water. You can either source it from the skies. You can source it from the ground. It's not like there's not a lot of water, but also keeping in mind that a lot of this grain, a lot of these crops is used to feed beef. So this has an impact not only to the grain prices, the breadbasket stuff that you were talking about in segment 1, it also has an impact to beef prices. So I guess boiling it all down, is there anything farmers can do other than ride this out?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so there are a couple of aspects to this question is number one, we've seen a lot of culling of beef herds, for example. And so we've got very low numbers, very low stock numbers. And we've gone through a big 3-year drought in much of the Western US that finally ended last winter. So we've maybe turned the corner, at least temporarily there. El Nino promises to bring a good winter to the Southwest. So we're at a position now where maybe we can start building some of the animal numbers again after a protracted drought. The second thing is that working for USDA, I know they provide a lot of lifelines, financial lifelines. There is something now. One of my roles with USDA is as one of the U.S. Drought Monitor authors. I'm one of the rotating authors for that product, and I have been for almost a quarter century. And that product, the U.S. Drought Monitor, is the trigger for the Livestock Forage Disaster Program, which provides direct payouts to livestock producers. They don't fall under the normal crop insurance that a lot of row crop producers have. And so, I'm not involved in that program, obviously, but as a Drought Monitor author, I pay attention to it. And that has certainly been a lifeline to provide payments to drought-affected livestock producers.
Brad, last question. Is there anything we can do as consumers? Obviously, you can't control the weather. You can have an impact on, recycling and things like that may affect the overall climate. But is there anything that we can do as consumers? Should we maybe we all go on a diet and eat less? I mean, but in all seriousness, anything we can do as consumers to help the farmers? I mean, buy more at the higher prices. What can we do?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, you're talking to the weather guy here, so I'm not sure we can come up with a good answer for that in the short time we have. But I think we're a little bit all at the whims of nature and human nature, whether it be conflict and climate change. I guess we can all do our little part and hope that we can contain some of this crazy weather that we've experienced the last few decades. But from the standpoint of that, I guess I'm a realist, and I do understand that maybe there's not so much that each individual person can do to control these price swings and supply and demand concerns that we all face. We just have to roll with it in some respects, I'm afraid.
Well, and we always say roll with the changes. I guess that I lied. That's not my last question. My last question to you is about the almanac, and maybe more of a fun question. We always hear about the almanac, and it can kind of be predictive. How useful is the American Almanac in predicting maybe weather events? Where how the sun's gonna rise, et cetera. How useful is that today?
There's a lot of wisdom in those old almanacs, and I used to buy them every year. I don't anymore so much, but I used to read through it, and there's some great farming advice in terms of how they calculate their forecasts and the winter storms and how severe it's going to be. That's a little bit of I have to say, a little sketchy science. They're going to hate to hear that from me, but I think that's the truth. Anyway, but we know so much more than we used to with the ENSO, El Nino, La Nina cycles and how that drives weather. So I'm going to stick to the science on that, but don't give up on the almanacs, because they do have some good information and some good sound advice from centuries of people that lived before us. Yeah, really, really good point. Hopefully that saved us from some negative comments. But look, it's really amazing what you do, and I want to have you back to talk more about the science of meteorology. It's just absolutely fascinating. And I know you went through a lot of schooling. You've got a lot of experience. Brad, we're going to have to leave it there. Great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you back on the program again very soon. All right, great talking to you. And hopefully some of those dry areas will get some rain here the next few weeks. That wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Have a topic of interest, someone you think we should talk to, drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the latest curated news and lifestyle, wellness, finance, tech, so much more, all in one place, check out today's edition of our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse. Want to search our archives, check out our latest content, visit our website, and of course, all of our streaming partners. We're back again tomorrow for another edition of BRN AM. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes. Now is your opportunity to co-create content around any topic
on the first lifestyle and wellness network. Reach a global audience through our platform and co-own exclusive branded content. All of our programs are available on demand and also as audio-only podcasts, so you can take us on the go. Broadcast Retirement Network, available anytime, anywhere, and on any device.